The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the hotel room as Imani Johnson sat frozen on the edge of the king-sized bed, her wedding dress pooled around her like spilled milk. Her new husband stood by the window, his back to her, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Neither had spoken a word since they entered the room 20 minutes ago. The air felt thick with tension, making it hard for her to breathe. Just hours earlier, she had signed the contract that sold her future to a man whose eyes looked as empty as a winter sky. A man who now owned not just the building they were in, but also her family's debt, their home, and according to the marriage certificate, her. "We should get this over with," he finally said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. He turned to face her, and Imani felt her heart hammer against her ribs. At 25, she had never been intimate with anyone. Not because of religious reasons or strict upbringing, but simply because she had been waiting for love, real love, the kind her parents once had before her father's death. Now, here she was, about to give herself to a stranger who had bought her like property. Alexander Stone was not what anyone would call ugly. In fact, with his sharp jawline, broad shoulders, and piercing gray eyes, he was objectively handsome. But the coldness that radiated from him made Imani shiver. He was 35, successful beyond measure, and completely devoid of warmth. People called him the machine in business circles. Ruthless, calculating, and seemingly without a soul. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, walking toward her with measured steps. "But a deal is a deal. Your family's debts are cleared, your mother's medical bills taken care of, and your brother's education secured. In return, you are my wife. In every sense of the word." Imani's throat felt dry. How had it come to this? Just 3 months ago, she was an ordinary woman working 2 jobs to help her family stay afloat after her father's death left them with crushing debt. Then came her mother's diagnosis, cancer that required expensive treatment their insurance wouldn't cover. When Alexander Stone offered to buy her father's failing company, pay off their debts, and cover her mother's medical expenses in exchange for her hand in marriage, Imani had been cornered with no other option. "Can I ask why?" she whispered, finding her voice at last. "Why me? You could have anyone." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed Alexander's face before the mask of indifference returned. "I need a wife who won't complicate things with emotions," he stated flatly. "Someone who understands that this is a business arrangement. Nothing more, nothing less. Your background check showed you're responsible, caring, and—" he paused, his eyes briefly scanning her figure, "untouched. Perfect for my needs." "And what exactly are those needs?" Imani asked, anger finally breaking through her fear. "An ornament to show off at business functions? A broodmare for your heirs?" For a moment, Alexander looked taken aback by her outburst. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. "I need someone genuine," he said after a long pause. "The women in my world are after one thing: money. At least you're honest about why you're here. It's refreshing." He moved to sit beside her on the bed, the mattress barely dipping under his weight. Imani instinctively shifted away, and he noticed. "We don't have to do anything tonight," he said, surprising her. "Contrary to what you might think, I'm not a monster. I won't force you." Relief washed over Imani like a cool wave, but confusion quickly followed. "But you said—" "I said you would be my wife in every sense of the word, yes. But I didn't specify a timeline." He stood up, straightening his already perfect suit. "We have time. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we leave for my estate." With that, he grabbed a pillow and headed for the couch across the room, leaving Imani alone on the bed, her mind spinning with questions. What kind of game was he playing? What did he really want from her? And why did she feel a strange twinge of disappointment when he walked away? As she lay in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of Alexander's breathing from across the room, Imani realized that this arrangement was going to be far more complicated than she had imagined. She had expected cruelty from the man known as the Soulless Billionaire, but not consideration, not restraint. Little did she know that this night was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, sacrifice, and the human capacity for change. As sleep finally claimed her, one last thought drifted through her mind. Perhaps the man people called soulless wasn't quite as empty as everyone believed. The Stone estate sprawled across 50 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, its massive stone facade looming like a fortress against the clear blue sky. As the car pulled through the wrought iron gates, Imani couldn't help but feel like she was entering a prison, albeit the most luxurious one imaginable. "This is where we'll live?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them during the hour-long drive from the hotel. Alexander glanced at her, his expression unreadable. One of my properties. I thought you might prefer the country to the city penthouse. More space. More privacy. Privacy. The word hung in the air like an unspoken question. What exactly did he expect would happen in private? The car stopped at the front entrance where a line of staff stood waiting to greet them. Imani felt woefully underdressed in her simple jeans and blouse next to their crisp uniforms. Alexander stepped out first, then extended his hand to help her. His touch was warm, his grip firm but not uncomfortable. She tried not to think about how it was the first time they had touched since their cold, mechanical handshake after the wedding ceremony. "Mrs. Stone, welcome home," said an older woman at the front of the line, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. "I'm Mrs. Reynolds, the head housekeeper. Anything you need, just ask." Mrs. Stone. The name felt foreign, like clothing that didn't quite fit. Imani nodded politely, unable to find words that wouldn't sound awkward or forced. "Show my wife to her rooms, please," Alexander instructed. "I have calls to make. I'll see you at dinner, Imani." Her rooms. Not their rooms. Another surprise. Mrs. Reynolds led Imani through the mansion's vast interior, past artwork that probably cost more than her family's house, under chandeliers that sparkled like falling stars, across marble floors that echoed with each step. Finally, they reached a set of double doors on the second floor. "Your suite, Mrs. Stone," the housekeeper announced, pushing the doors open to reveal a space larger than Imani's entire apartment. The room was beautiful, decorated in soft blues and creams with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with plush armchairs occupied another. Two more doors led to what Mrs. Reynolds explained were a bathroom, the size of most people's living rooms, and a walk-in closet, already stocked with a suitable wardrobe. Mr. Stone had everything prepared based on the measurements provided by the wedding dress designer, the housekeeper added. Of course he did. Alexander Stone left nothing to chance, not even the clothing of his purchased bride. "And Mr. Stone's room?" Imani asked, trying to sound casual. "The master suite is across the hall," Mrs. Reynolds replied, her expression neutral. "Mr. Stone thought you might appreciate your own space." She paused, then added, "He's not what people say he is, you know." "And what do they say?" "That he's cold. Unfeeling." The older woman's eyes softened slightly. 20 years I've worked for him. He's a complicated man but not a cruel one." After Mrs. Reynolds left, Imani explored her new cage. The closet was indeed filled with clothes, all in her size, all expensive brands she had only seen in magazines. The bathroom featured a tub that could fit 3 people comfortably and a shower with more settings than her old car had buttons. She felt lost in this world of excess, this life she hadn't chosen. At precisely 7 o'clock, a soft knock at the door announced it was time for dinner. A young maid led her downstairs to a dining room where a table long enough to seat 20 was set for just 2. One place at each end as far apart as possible. Alexander was already seated, his attention fixed on documents spread beside his plate. He looked up when she entered, and for a brief moment, something like appreciation flashed in his eyes. Imani had chosen one of the simpler dresses from her new wardrobe, a forest green wrap dress that hugged her curves without being too revealing. "You look nice," he said, standing as she approached. It wasn't exactly a passionate compliment, but from him, it felt significant. "Thank you," she replied, taking her seat as a server appeared seemingly from nowhere to unfold her napkin. "This house is overwhelming. You'll get used to it." "Will I?" She met his gaze directly. "Will I get used to being married to a stranger? To having my life decided for me?" Alexander set down his fork, studying her with those cool gray eyes. "You made a choice, Imani. Perhaps not an ideal one, but still a choice. You chose your family's well-being over your freedom. That's admirable." "It doesn't feel admirable. It feels like I've been bought." "In a way you have," he acknowledged without flinching. "But that doesn't mean you can't find purpose here. What did you want to do before all this?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in a long time. "I was studying nursing before my father died. I had to drop out to work full-time." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. "Nursing. Helping people. That fits what I know about you." "What do you know about me, really?" "More than you might think." He took a sip of his wine. "Your father's company employed 300 people. When it started failing, you worked 2 jobs so he could keep paying his employees even when the business wasn't profitable anymore. When he died, you took on his debts instead of declaring bankruptcy because you felt responsible for those workers' livelihoods." Imani stared at him, unsettled by how much he knew. You've done your research. I always do. For the first time, a genuine half-smile appeared on his face. I told you I needed someone genuine. Someone who puts others before themselves. Why? Alexander's expression closed again, the brief moment of openness gone. That's a discussion for another time. He returned to his meal, effectively ending the conversation. Later that night, as Imani lay in her new bed, too large, too soft, too unfamiliar, she couldn't help wondering about the man across the hall. What had made him this way? What wounds was he hiding behind that impenetrable facade? And why did she care at all about the inner workings of a man who had essentially purchased her like property? Sleep didn't come easily as questions swirled in her mind. One thing was becoming clear though: Alexander Stone wasn't exactly what she had expected. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. Outside her window, the moon cast the same silvery light as it had on their wedding night. Only 24 hours had passed, but Imani felt as though she had crossed into another world entirely. A world of wealth and power, yes, but also of secrets and unspoken rules. A world where her new husband was both her jailer and, strangely, her protector. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Imani couldn't shake the feeling that beneath Alexander's cold exterior lay something unexpected. Something that might change everything if she ever discovered what it was. A week passed in the Stone mansion, each day following a pattern so predictable Imani could set her watch by it. Alexander left for work before she woke, returned precisely at 6:30, joined her for a silent dinner at 7, and then disappeared into his study until she retired to her room. They barely spoke beyond polite pleasantries, existing in parallel rather than together. Until the thunderstorm. It happened on the 8th night of their strange marriage. Rain lashed against the windows with violent force, lightning illuminating the grounds in brief, stark flashes. Imani had always been afraid of storms, a fear she'd never outgrown from childhood. Each crack of thunder made her flinch beneath her covers. At just past midnight, a particularly loud boom shook the house, and the power went out, plunging her room into absolute darkness. Panic rose in her chest as she fumbled for her phone, finding it dead. The backup generators should have kicked in immediately, but for some reason they hadn't. Wrapping herself in a robe, Imani ventured into the hallway, guided only by occasional lightning flashes. She hesitated outside Alexander's door, pride warring with fear. Another thunderclap decided for her. She knocked. No answer. Gathering her courage, she pushed the door open. Alexander? His room was empty, the bed unslept in. Where would he be at this hour? Then she remembered his study downstairs. Taking a deep breath, Imani made her way through the dark house, jumping at shadows and thunder in equal measure. She found him in his study as expected, but not as she expected to find him. Alexander sat on the floor in the dark, back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing in a controlled rhythm that seemed almost meditative. A bottle of whiskey sat beside him, half empty. "Alexander?" she called softly. His eyes snapped open, momentarily disoriented before focusing on her. "Imani, what are you doing here?" "The power," she began, then stopped as she noticed something unexpected. A sheen of sweat on his forehead, a slight tremor in his usually steady hands. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said curtly, pulling himself to his feet with visible effort. "The generators should engage soon. Go back to your room." But Imani didn't move. In the brief illumination from lightning outside, she saw what looked like pain etched into his features. "You're not fine. What's wrong?" "Nothing that concerns you." "I'm your wife," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Even if it's just on paper, that makes it my concern." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or grudging respect. After a long pause he sighed. "Migraines. I get them during storms. Always have since I was a child. The barometric pressure changes trigger them." Imani's nursing training kicked in immediately. "Have you taken anything?" "Nothing works," he said flatly. "I've tried everything. This," he gestured to the whiskey, "dulls it somewhat. I just have to wait it out." Without thinking, she crossed the room and knelt beside him. "May I?" she asked, raising her hands. Confusion crossed his face, but he nodded cautiously. Imani placed her fingertips at his temples and began to massage in small, firm circles. "My mother gets migraines too," she explained softly. "This helps sometimes. Pressure point therapy." At first, Alexander remained rigid under her touch, but gradually she felt him relax slightly. His eyes closed again as she moved her fingers to the base of his skull, applying gentle pressure. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Nursing school. And my grandmother. She believed in natural remedies for everything. Imani kept her voice soft, knowing how sound could worsen a migraine. Deep breaths, she instructed. Surprisingly, he complied, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with her quiet counting. They stayed like that for several minutes, a strange tableau of intimacy neither had expected. The billionaire sitting on the floor, vulnerable for perhaps the first time in years, and his arranged bride tending to him with gentle hands. Suddenly the lights flickered and came back on. Alexander flinched at the brightness, and Imani immediately stood to dim the switches. When she returned, he was getting to his feet, the mask of control sliding back into place. Thank you, he said stiffly, as if the moment of weakness embarrassed him. That was helpful. You should try to sleep, she suggested. The worst of the storm is passing. He nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made her self-conscious of her thin nightgown under the robe. Why did you come downstairs? He asked finally. If the power outage didn't bother the staff enough to check on me, why did it bring you here? Imani hesitated, then decided on honesty. I'm afraid of storms. Have been since I was little. I wanted company, I guess. Something like understanding flickered in his eyes. We all have our childhood fears that follow us into adulthood. It was perhaps the most personal statement he had made since they met. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled with unasked questions. We should both get some rest, Alexander finally said, gesturing toward the door. Imani nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Imani? She looked back at him. If there's another storm. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. You're welcome to come find me. If you need company. It wasn't exactly a warm invitation, but from Alexander Stone, it felt like a significant concession. The same goes for your migraines, she replied. I can help. If you let me. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that somehow felt important. The first crack in the wall between them. As Imani returned to her room, the storm now just a distant rumble, she realized something had shifted tonight. She had seen beneath Alexander's perfect exterior to the human being beneath. A man who felt pain, who had fears like anyone else. And he, in turn, had seen her vulnerability and not dismissed it. It wasn't friendship and it certainly wasn't love. But it was something. The beginning, perhaps. She fell asleep more easily than she had since coming to this place, the memory of Alexander's rare moment of openness following her into her dreams. Tomorrow he would probably be the cold, distant man again. But now she knew that wasn't all he was. And for some reason she couldn't quite explain, that knowledge felt important. Like finding a key without yet knowing which door it might open. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Imani had settled into a routine that almost felt normal. She spent her mornings exploring the vast grounds of the estate, afternoons reading in the library or helping Mrs. Reynolds with household management, despite the housekeeper's initial protest that such work wasn't appropriate for the mistress of the house. And evenings dining with Alexander, their conversations gradually becoming less stilted. That particular Tuesday, however, disrupted the pattern. Imani was curled up in the library with a medical textbook. Alexander had ordered an entire collection when he learned she was interested in resuming her nursing studies, when Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the door. Mrs. Stone, you have visitors. Visitors? Imani hadn't spoken to anyone outside the estate since the wedding. Alexander had been clear about maintaining privacy during the adjustment period, as he called it. Who is it? She asked, setting aside her book. Your mother and brother, ma'am. Mr. Stone arranged for them to be brought here. Imani's heart leaped as she rushed to the entrance hall. There stood her mother, looking healthier than she had in months, and her 19-year-old brother Darius, both gaping at the grandeur around them. Mom? Darius. She flew into their arms, fighting back tears as she held them tight. It had been only 3 weeks, but it felt like years. Look at you, her mother said, holding her at arm's length. Living in a palace like a queen. I'm hardly a queen, Mom, Imani replied with a small smile. How are you feeling? The treatments? Working wonders, her mother assured her. That specialist Mr. Stone arranged, expensive as he is, he knows what he's doing. I have more energy than I've had in years. Darius, always more perceptive than he let on, studied his sister carefully. Are you okay? Really okay? I'm fine, Imani said, meaning it more than she expected to. It's different but not terrible. Alexander is. She trailed off, not sure how to describe their strange relationship. Rich as sin and twice as mysterious, her mother finished for her. He called us himself, you know. Arranged the car, made sure I had my medication. Said you might need some familiar faces. This surprised Imani. Alexander hadn't mentioned contacting her family. It was thoughtful in a way she wouldn't have expected from him. They spent the afternoon catching up in one of the smaller sitting rooms, where Mrs. Reynolds served tea and pastries. Darius talked excitedly about college. Alexander had arranged for him to attend the prestigious university he'd always dreamed of, while their mother shared news about neighbors and friends. People talk, you know, her mother said eventually, lowering her voice. About your marriage. They say awful things. Like what? Imani asked, though she could imagine. That you sold yourself to pay our debts. That you're nothing but her mother couldn't finish. A trophy? A possession. Imani supplied. I know what people must think. Is that what he thinks? Darius asked, protective anger flashing in his eyes. Imani considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. I don't think that's how he sees me at all. I'm just not sure what he does see when he looks at me. Before they could discuss it further, the sitting room door opened and Alexander himself walked in. He rarely came home before 6, yet here he was at 3 in the afternoon, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a car. Mr. Stone, Imani's mother started to rise, but Alexander waved her back to her seat. Please, Mrs. Johnson, no need for formality. I'm your son-in-law after all. The words sounded strange coming from him, as if he was trying on a role that didn't quite fit. I hope you found everything to your satisfaction. More than that, her mother said warmly. Thank you for arranging this visit. And for everything else. Alexander nodded, his expression softening slightly. It was the least I could do. Imani has been very patient with our arrangement. Patient. As if their marriage was some kind of medical procedure she was enduring. I have a meeting with Darius' academic advisor in an hour, Alexander continued, checking his watch. I thought he might want to join me. They're discussing a summer internship at one of my companies. Darius looked stunned. For real? I mean, yes, I'd like that. Thank you, sir. Alexander, please. He turned to Imani's mother. And Mrs. Johnson, I've arranged for you to meet with Dr. Feldman while you're here. He's been consulting on your case and wanted to discuss some adjustments to your treatment plan. The efficiency with which Alexander had organized their day was both impressive and slightly unnerving. He seemed to have thought of everything, anticipated every need. That's very thoughtful, Imani said, studying him with new eyes. Will you join us for dinner later? Something like surprise flickered across his face at the invitation. Of course. If you'd like me to. After Alexander and Darius left, and her mother went to her medical appointment, Imani found herself alone in the vast house, mulling over this new side of her husband. Why would a man supposedly without feelings go to such lengths for her family? For people who meant nothing to his business interests? Later that evening, dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Alexander, usually so reserved, made an effort to engage in conversation, asking Darius about his studies and listening with apparent interest to her mother's stories about Imani's childhood. She was always taking care of others, her mother said fondly. Even as a little girl. Neighborhood strays, injured birds, classmates with skinned knees. Always had a first aid kit in her backpack. That doesn't surprise me, Alexander commented, his eyes finding Imani's across the table. Something warm in his gaze made her heart skip unexpectedly. After dinner, Alexander excused himself to take a call, and Imani walked her family to their guest rooms. Her mother pulled her aside in the hallway, voice low. He watches you when you're not looking, she said. Not in a creepy way, but like he's trying to solve a puzzle. Mom, it's not like that between us, Imani insisted. Maybe not yet, her mother replied with a knowing smile. But that man didn't bring us here just to be nice. He wanted to see you happy. And honey, the way he looked when you laughed at dinner, there's something there. Imani brushed off her mother's romantic notions, but the observation lingered in her mind as she headed back downstairs. On impulse, she went to Alexander's study, finding the door ajar. He sat at his desk, phone to his ear, expression serious. I don't care what it costs, he was saying. Find the treatment. If it's experimental, get it approved. Use my name if you have to. He paused, listening. Mrs. Johnson deserves the best care available. Make it happen. Imani stepped back, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but her movement caught Alexander's attention. He ended his call quickly and looked up at her. Your family is settling in all right? He asked, as if she hadn't just overheard him going above and beyond for her mother's care. Yes, she said, entering the study properly now. Thank you for bringing them here. And for everything else you're doing for them. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. It was part of our arrangement. No, Imani said firmly. Our arrangement was to pay off their debts and cover basic medical care. Not to get my brother into an elite university with internship opportunities. Not to find experimental treatments for my mother. Not to bring them here to see me because you thought I might be lonely. Alexander looked away, his jaw tight. Does it bother you? My involvement in their lives. It confuses me, she admitted. Why do all this? What do you get out of it? He was silent for so long that Imani thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. I know what it's like to worry about family. To feel responsible for them. Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes. And I know what it's like to lose them despite everything you try to do. It was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her. Imani took a step closer to his desk. Who did you lose? As soon as the words left her mouth, she could see him shutting down, the brief moment of openness disappearing behind his usual mask. It's late, he said, standing abruptly. You should get some rest. Your family will want to spend time with you tomorrow before they leave. The deflection was obvious, but Imani didn't push. Instead, she nodded and turned to go but paused at the door. Alexander? He looked up at her. Whatever your reasons, thank you. Seeing them happy and healthy means everything to me. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight release of tension in his shoulders. Good night, Imani, he said, his voice carrying a warmth she hadn't heard before. As she walked back to her room, Imani replayed their conversation in her mind. For the first time she had glimpsed something beyond the cold, calculating businessman. A man who understood loss, who recognized the importance of family. A man who, perhaps, wasn't as soulless as the world believed. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. He watches you when you're not looking. Was it possible there was more to their arrangement than a simple business transaction? And why did the thought make her heart beat a little faster? Sleep came slowly that night, her mind filled with questions about the enigmatic man she had married. The wall between them had cracked a little more tonight, revealing depths she hadn't expected. What else might she discover if those cracks continued to widen? I need you to accompany me to an event this weekend, Alexander announced over breakfast 1 month into their marriage. It was the first time he had requested her presence at anything outside the estate. What kind of event? Imani asked, setting down her coffee cup. A charity gala. My company is the main sponsor. He spoke casually as if attending high society functions was an everyday occurrence, which for him it probably was. It's important that I attend, and as my wife, your presence is expected. There it was, the reminder of her role in this arrangement. A prop, a necessary accessory to complete his image. Will I need something to wear? She asked, thinking of the dresses in her closet. Nice as they were, she doubted any were suitable for the kind of event where billionaires gathered. Already taken care of. A stylist will come tomorrow with options. He hesitated, then added, I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you're uncomfortable. I'll go, Imani interrupted. Despite her reservations, she was curious to see Alexander in his natural habitat, the world of wealth and power she'd only glimpsed through the mansion's windows. Just tell me what's expected of me. Relief flashed briefly across his face. Just be yourself. That's all I ask. The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of activity. The stylist had brought several gowns, but Imani had chosen a deep burgundy dress with a modest neckline and an open back that made her feel both elegant and confident. Her natural hair was styled in an elaborate updo adorned with tiny crystal pins that caught the light when she moved. When she descended the staircase, Alexander was waiting in the foyer, resplendent in a black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. For a moment he simply stared at her, an unreadable expression on his face. Is something wrong? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. No, he said quickly. You look beautiful. The compliment, delivered with uncharacteristic sincerity, brought heat to her cheeks. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he offered his arm. Shall we? The ride to the city in his sleek black Bentley was mostly silent, but not uncomfortably so. Alexander seemed preoccupied, his usual intensity heightened. Only when they were approaching the venue, a historic hotel whose grand facade was lit up like a jewel box, did he speak again. There will be people there who know about our arrangement, he said quietly. People who may say things intended to upset you. I want you to know that you don't have to engage with them. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, find me immediately. The protective tone in his voice surprised her. I can handle a few catty remarks, Alexander. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. Socialites don't scare me. This time his smile was more genuine. I don't doubt your resilience. But these people, they can be cruel in ways you might not expect. Why do you associate with them if you dislike them so much? Business, he said simply. The world runs on connections, and connections are made at events like these. He paused, then added, but it doesn't mean I have to enjoy it. The car stopped at the entrance, where photographers crowded behind velvet ropes. Alexander squeezed her hand lightly before they stepped out. Remember, just be yourself. That's more than enough. The next few minutes passed in a blur of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Alexander guided her through with a hand at the small of her back, his touch warm through the thin fabric of her dress. He fielded the most intrusive queries with practiced ease, neither confirming nor denying the rumors about their whirlwind marriage. Inside, the ballroom took Imani's breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings, their light reflected in polished marble floors. Hundreds of people in formal wear mingled among tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Alexander. A silver-haired man approached, clapping Alexander on the shoulder with forced familiarity. And this must be the mysterious new Mrs. Stone we've all been hearing about. Richard, Alexander acknowledged coolly. This is my wife Imani. Imani, Richard Westfield, CEO of Westfield Industries. Charmed, Richard said, his eyes assessing Imani with undisguised curiosity. You've certainly caused a stir. No one even knew Alexander was dating, and suddenly he returns from a business trip with a bride. Very romantic. The insinuation in his tone was clear. Imani smiled pleasantly. Sometimes when you know, you just know. Indeed, Richard replied, not bothering to hide his skepticism. And what did you do before becoming Mrs. Stone? Modeling? Acting, perhaps. Before Imani could respond, a woman in a stunning silver gown joined them, linking her arm through Richard's. Don't monopolize the couple, darling, she chided, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm Vivian Westfield. Alexander and I are old friends. The way she said friends made Imani wonder if there was history there. Alexander's expression revealed nothing, but she felt his hand press a little more firmly against her back. I was studying nursing, Imani answered Richard's question directly. Before life took an unexpected turn. Nursing? Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. How charitable. Though I suppose caring for others is a valuable skill in any relationship. Her gaze flicked to Alexander. Especially with someone as demanding as Alexander can be. Alexander's jaw tightened. If you'll excuse us, we should greet the other guests. As he guided her away, Imani felt the weight of eyes following them. Friends? She whispered. Vivian pursued me for years, he answered quietly. I wasn't interested. She seems to still have feelings for you. What Vivian has feelings for is my bank account. His voice was bitter. You'll find that's common in these circles. Throughout the evening, they moved from group to group, Alexander introducing her with a protectiveness that gradually relaxed as he saw how well she handled herself. Imani discovered she had a talent for deflecting intrusive questions with polite but firm responses that revealed little while giving the impression of openness. During a brief moment alone while Alexander spoke with some business associates, Imani found herself cornered by Vivian once more. He'll get bored, you know, the woman said bluntly, sipping champagne. Alexander always does. Whatever arrangement you've made with him, I'd start planning for its inevitable end. Is that what happened with you? Imani asked mildly. He got bored? Vivian's eyes narrowed. You think you're different? Special? Alexander Stone doesn't do love, sweetheart. Ask him about Caroline if you don't believe me. Before Imani could ask who Caroline was, Alexander appeared at her side as if sensing her discomfort. The auction is about to begin, he said, nodding curtly to Vivian before leading Imani away. Who's Caroline? Imani asked once they were out of earshot. Alexander stopped walking, his expression darkening. Someone from my past. It's not important now. But Imani could tell from his reaction that it was very important indeed. The auction portion of the evening proved to be enlightening in other ways. Imani watched as Alexander bid staggering amounts on items whose proceeds went to children's education initiatives. When a painting by a local artist who worked with underprivileged youth came up for bidding, he methodically outbid everyone else in the room, ultimately paying 10 times the asking price. You just spent $500,000 on a painting, Imani whispered as applause filled the room. It's for a good cause, he replied simply. But the painter, he's just a kid from the projects. I read the description. Alexander's gaze softened. Then perhaps it will change his life to know his work has value. This unexpected display of generosity touched something in Imani. Throughout the night, she'd watched him interact with waitstaff and security personnel with the same respect he showed to fellow executives. He remembered names, asked after families, left generous tips. It contradicted everything she'd heard about the soulless billionaire. As the evening wound down, they found themselves on a terrace overlooking the city lights. The night air was cool, and Alexander surprised her by placing his jacket around her shoulders without being asked. You were remarkable tonight, he said, leaning against the stone balustrade. Everyone was expecting a gold digger? An embarrassment? A puppet? Imani supplied when he trailed off. Someone who didn't belong, he finished. Instead, you were the most genuine person in the room. It was refreshing. Imani studied his profile in the moonlight, struck by how young he looked with his guard down. Why does it matter what they think of me? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Because their opinion of you reflects on me, he said at last. And unlike most things they say about me, I happen to care about that. The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than it might seem to an outsider. Alexander Stone, caring about something beyond business and profit. It felt like a revelation. Thank you for coming tonight, he added, turning to face her fully. I know this isn't what you envisioned for your life. Imani thought about the past month, the strange, evolving relationship they were building day by day. It's not what I expected, she admitted. But it's not terrible either. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. High praise indeed. Something in his expression made her heart beat faster. For a moment she thought he might move closer, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained despite sharing a home, a name, a life on paper. Instead he cleared his throat and stepped back. We should go. It's getting late. The ride home was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the mansion, Alexander walked her to her door as he always did, keeping a respectful distance. Good night, Imani, he said formally. Alexander, she called as he turned to go. Tonight, when you outbid everyone for that painting, you didn't do it because it was a good investment, did you? He paused, not looking back. No. Then why? Finally, he turned, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. Because I know what it's like to have talent but no opportunities. To have potential that no one believes in. He hesitated, then added softly, and because I saw how you looked at that painting. How much it moved you. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Imani staring after him with new questions swirling in her mind. Who was this man really? The cold, calculating businessman the world saw, or the person she was beginning to glimpse beneath that carefully constructed facade? And why did her heart keep racing when he looked at her the way he had tonight? 6 weeks into their marriage, Imani had settled into a routine that almost felt normal. She had begun volunteering at a local clinic 2 days a week, arranged by Alexander after she mentioned missing nursing, and was considering enrolling in online courses to finish her degree. The vast mansion felt less like a prison and more like home, especially since Alexander had surprised her by converting one of the unused rooms into a study space for her, complete with medical textbooks and the latest technology. Their relationship had evolved into something like friendship, still cautious, still formal in many ways, but with moments of genuine connection. They shared meals regularly now, discussed books, debated current events. Alexander seemed to value her opinions, often asking what she thought about business decisions or charitable initiatives. What hadn't changed was the careful physical distance between them. They still occupied separate bedrooms, and while there were occasional touches, a hand at her back when guiding her through a doorway, fingers brushing when passing items at dinner, there was nothing that could be mistaken for romantic interest. Which was fine, Imani told herself. This was a business arrangement after all, not a love match. The fact that she sometimes found herself wondering what it would be like if Alexander kissed her was simply a natural reaction to living in close quarters with an objectively attractive man. Nothing more. She was in the garden, reading a book on advanced trauma care, when Mrs. Reynolds approached with an uncharacteristically concerned expression. Mrs. Stone, there are visitors at the front gate. They're quite insistent about seeing Mr. Stone, but he's in the city for meetings all day. Who are they? Imani asked, marking her place in the book. A man and a woman. They say they're Mr. Stone's parents. Imani stared at her in shock. In all their conversations, Alexander had never once mentioned that his parents were alive. Family was a topic he skillfully avoided whenever it arose. Did you call him? I tried. He's not answering. They're becoming quite agitated at the gate, and I'm not sure how much longer security can politely keep them there. Imani made a quick decision. Let them in. I'll meet with them until Alexander returns. Mrs. Reynolds looked uncertain. Mr. Stone has very strict policies about unexpected visitors. They're his parents, Mrs. Reynolds. If there's anyone who should be an exception to those policies, it's them. Though privately, Imani wondered why they would need to be exceptions at all. Why wouldn't Alexander want to see his parents? 20 minutes later, Imani found herself in the main sitting room facing two people who bore little resemblance to Alexander. Gregory Stone was a heavy-set man with a florid complexion and an expensive but slightly rumpled suit. Marlene Stone was thin to the point of gauntness, with dyed blonde hair and jewelry that seemed chosen more for its obvious expense than aesthetic appeal. So you're the girl who managed to snag our son, Marlene said, eyeing Imani with undisguised suspicion. We had to read about the wedding in the financial papers. Not even a phone call. I'm sorry, Imani said carefully. I didn't realize Alexander hadn't told you about our marriage. Gregory snorted. Alex hasn't told us anything in nearly 15 years. Not since he decided we weren't good enough for his fancy new life. That's not true, Greg, Marlene snapped. He sends checks. Every month like clockwork. As if money could replace actually having a son. Imani felt increasingly uncomfortable. Clearly there was bad blood here that Alexander had never mentioned. I'm sure Alexander will be back soon. Perhaps we should. Oh, once he knows we're here, he'll find some excuse not to come home, Gregory interrupted. That's why we didn't call ahead. Had to ambush him. He looked around the room with a mixture of bitterness and awe. Look at all this. And he grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment, did he tell you that? Working-class folk we were. Until Alex got his scholarship to that fancy school and decided he was too good for us. That's not fair, Greg, Marlene said, though there was little conviction in her defense. He wanted a better life. A better life without us in it, you mean? Gregory retorted. Imani's mind was spinning. This was a side of Alexander's history she'd never imagined. I'm sure there's more to the story then. Of course there is, came Alexander's cold voice from the doorway. All three turned to see him standing there, his expression harder than Imani had ever seen it, even on their wedding day. Gone was the man who had begun to smile at her over breakfast, who had listened to her ideas with genuine interest. In his place stood someone who looked carved from stone, eyes like ice as they fixed on his parents. Alexander, Marlene stood, arms outstretched. Darling, it's been so long. He didn't move to embrace her. What are you doing here? Can't parents visit their only son? Especially when he's gone and gotten married without a word to his family? Alexander's gaze flickered briefly to Imani, a flash of something like regret crossing his features before the mask descended again. Mrs. Reynolds will show you out. Now wait just a minute, Gregory protested, rising to his feet. We've come all this way. And I'm sure you've explained to my wife exactly why we haven't spoken in 15 years, Alexander cut in. How much did you ask for this time? 50,000? 100. Marlene at least had the grace to look embarrassed. Alex, please. We're in a difficult position. You're always in a difficult position, he replied, his voice dangerously quiet. And it's always solved with my money, which you receive monthly in amounts most people would consider generous. Yet somehow it's never enough. Imani watched the scene unfold with growing understanding. This wasn't about family estrangement due to Alexander's success. This was about something darker, exploitation perhaps. The bitter lines around Alexander's mouth spoke of old wounds reopened. Alexander, she said gently, standing up, perhaps we could all have dinner together? Talk things through? For a moment, he looked at her with such naked vulnerability that it took her breath away. Then the shutters came down again. There's nothing to talk about. They came for money as they always do. Once they have it, they'll leave. That's not fair, son, Gregory protested, though the guilty flush on his face suggested otherwise. Isn't it? The rehab costs, the gambling debts, the investment opportunities that somehow never materialize, the medical emergencies that miraculously resolve once the check clears. Alexander's voice was flat, emotionless. Every time I tell myself it's the last time, and every time I give in. But not today. Marlene began to cry, dramatic sobs that didn't quite ring true. After all we sacrificed for you? Sacrificed. Alexander's composure finally cracked. What exactly did you sacrifice, mother? You spent my college fund on a cruise when I was 16. Father drank away every penny I sent home during my first year at university. When Caroline was sick, he stopped abruptly, seeming to remember Imani's presence. Caroline. There was that name again. We made mistakes, Gregory admitted. But we're family. That has to count for something. Alexander looked at them for a long moment, then at Imani, whose confusion must have been evident on her face. Something in his expression softened. You'll have your monthly allowance as always, he said finally. But I won't have you upsetting my wife or disrupting our home. Please leave. After his parents had gone, escorted firmly but politely by security, a heavy silence fell over the mansion. Alexander disappeared into his study, the door closing with a decisive click that clearly said, "Do not disturb." Imani respected his privacy for several hours, giving him space to process whatever emotions the unexpected visit had stirred up. But as evening approached and he still hadn't emerged, concern overcame her hesitation. She knocked softly on the study door. When there was no answer, she tried the handle, finding it unlocked. Alexander sat behind his desk, staring out the window at the gathering dusk. A glass of whiskey sat untouched before him. "I'm sorry," Imani said quietly. "I shouldn't have let them in without checking with you first." He didn't look at her. "You weren't to know." "Who's Caroline?" she asked gently. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that this would be another wall between them, another secret kept. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "My sister." Imani moved further into the room, taking a seat across from him. "You never mentioned you had a sister." "Had," he emphasized, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes held a pain so raw it made her chest ache. "She died. 15 years ago." Understanding dawned. "That's when you stopped speaking to your parents." Alexander nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. "Caroline was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 12. I was 19 in my first year at college on scholarship. The doctors said she needed a specific treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. Experimental but promising." His voice grew distant, as if reciting facts from a case study rather than his own life. "I dropped out, got 3 jobs, lived on ramen and water to save every penny for her treatment." Imani's heart contracted. "That must have been incredibly hard." "I would have done anything for her," he said simply. "Caroline was pure. Kind in a way neither of our parents ever were. She used to say I was her hero." His voice caught on the word. "Some hero." "I sent the money home, $50,000 that took me 9 months to save, and they promised they were arranging the treatment." A sick feeling grew in Imani's stomach as she began to see where this was heading. They didn't use it for her treatment, did they? They bought a new car. Took a vacation. Paid off some debts. The words were flat, emotionless. "By the time I found out, Caroline's condition had deteriorated too far for the treatment to help. She died 3 weeks later, asking why I never came to visit her in the hospital." His hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. "I didn't know she was even in the hospital. They hadn't told me how bad things had gotten." "Alexander, I'm so sorry," Imani whispered, tears welling in her eyes for the sister she would never meet, for the young man who had lost her so tragically. "After she died I swore 2 things," he continued, his voice distant. "That I would never depend on anyone else again, and that I would become so wealthy that I could help people like Caroline. People who needed treatment their families couldn't afford." He finally looked at her directly. "That's what the Alexander Stone Foundation does. Funds medical treatments for children whose insurance won't cover them. No questions asked, no red tape." Something clicked into place for Imani, the massive donations at the gala, his immediate and comprehensive handling of her mother's medical care, his support of her nursing ambitions. All of it stemming from this old wound that had never properly healed. "That's why you arranged our marriage the way you did," she said slowly. "You saw another family struggling with medical bills and you stepped in." A shadow of guilt crossed his face. "Initially, yes. But it was more than that. When I researched your family situation I found something familiar. Your dedication to your family reminded me of myself. The way you put everyone else first." He hesitated, then admitted quietly, "I wanted someone like that in my life again. Someone genuine." The vulnerability in his confession struck her deeply. This powerful man who controlled business empires and wielded influence like a weapon had been shaped by loss and betrayal into someone who craved authenticity but feared connection. Without thinking, Imani rose and moved around the desk. She took his hand in hers, the first time she had initiated contact between them. "Thank you for telling me." Alexander looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a surrender. I should have told you sooner. About all of it. We have time, she said gently. For a long moment they stayed like that, connected by touch and newfound understanding. Then Alexander did something that surprised her. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he said simply. It wasn't a declaration of love or a passionate embrace, but in the context of their careful, evolving relationship, it felt momentous. A boundary crossed, a new possibility opened. As Imani left his study a while later, after they had talked more openly than ever before, she realized that this soulless billionaire was anything but soulless. Behind his carefully constructed walls lay a heart capable of profound love, shaped by terrible loss. And for the first time she wondered if that heart might someday have room for her. 2 months into their marriage, Imani found herself genuinely happy. She had resumed her nursing studies online, was volunteering regularly at a local clinic, and had befriended several of the staff at the mansion, who had initially been wary of the new Mrs. Stone, but had warmed to her unpretentious nature. Most surprisingly, her relationship with Alexander had evolved into something that felt real. After the night he told her about Caroline, a new openness existed between them. They spoke more freely, shared meals without awkwardness, even laughed together occasionally. Alexander still maintained certain boundaries, physical and emotional, but they were becoming friends, perhaps even more. Which made what happened at the charity hospital groundbreaking all the more shocking. The Alexander Stone Foundation was building a new pediatric cancer center, and as the major donor, Alexander was expected to attend the ceremony. He had asked Imani to join him, and she had eagerly agreed, proud of the work he was doing in his sister's memory. The event started well. Alexander gave a brief, powerful speech about making cutting-edge care available to all children regardless of their family's financial situation. Imani, watching from the front row, felt a swell of admiration for the man he had become despite his painful past. Then came the surprise guest speaker, a famous oncologist who had apparently been instrumental in developing the treatment program the center would implement. Dr. James Westbrook took the podium to thunderous applause. "What an honor to be part of this groundbreaking facility," he began. "And what a testament to Alexander Stone's generosity. Though I must say I'm not surprised by it. I've known Alex and his family for many years, back when they were struggling to find treatment for young Caroline." Imani felt Alexander stiffen beside her. His face remained impassive, but she could sense the sudden tension radiating from him. "In fact," Dr. Westbrook continued, seemingly oblivious to Alexander's reaction, "I often think about how different things might have been if the experimental treatment had been available to Caroline back then. A real tragedy what happened." Alexander's hand gripped hers so tightly it almost hurt. His breathing had become shallow, controlled. "But today is about looking forward," the doctor concluded. "Thanks to Alexander's vision, no family will have to make the impossible choices his parents faced." The audience applauded, but Imani barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on Alexander, whose face had gone completely blank, a mask more impenetrable than any she had seen before, even on their wedding day. As soon as the ceremony concluded, he made excuses about an urgent call and disappeared. Imani found him 20 minutes later in the car, on the phone with someone, his voice clipped and cold. "I want him removed from the board. Immediately. I don't care about the publicity. Just do it." He ended the call as she slid into the seat beside him. "Alexander." "Not now," he cut her off, his voice flat. "Driver, take us home." The ride passed in tense silence. Imani wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but the invisible wall he had erected around himself seemed impenetrable. Only when they arrived at the mansion did she try again, following him to his study despite his obvious desire to be alone. What Dr. Westbrook said was a lie, Alexander interrupted sharply. "My parents didn't face impossible choices. They had the money for Caroline's treatment. They chose not to use it for that purpose." "I know," Imani said gently. "But retreating, shutting down like this. You don't understand," he said, pouring himself a whiskey with a hand that trembled slightly. "Westbrook was her doctor. He knew where the money went. He covered for my parents because they were old friends. Told me Caroline's condition had progressed too far, that the treatment wouldn't have saved her anyway." Imani's heart sank. "You don't believe that?" "I didn't. Not until I got access to her medical records years later, after I had the resources to investigate properly." Alexander's voice was hollow. He was right. By the time I sent the money it was too late. The treatment might have extended her life by a few months, but it wouldn't have saved her. "Alexander, that's not your fault," Isn't it? His voice rose, the first time she had ever heard him approach, shouting. I should have been there. I should have seen how sick she was getting. But I was so focused on earning money, on being the hero who would save her, that I wasn't there when she needed me. The raw pain in his voice broke something open in Imani. She crossed the room and took the glass from his hand, setting it aside before taking both his hands in hers. Listen to me, she said firmly. You were 19 years old, working 3 jobs, doing everything humanly possible to save your sister. Your parents were the adults. They were responsible. For Caroline's care, for communicating with you, for using the money appropriately. Not you. Alexander shook his head, trying to pull away, but Imani held on. No, you need to hear this. What happened to Caroline was tragic, but it wasn't your fault. You've spent 15 years punishing yourself for something you couldn't control. Building walls around your heart, pushing away any chance at real connection because you're afraid of failing someone else the way you think you failed her. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Don't I? Alexander, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. I've spent the last 2 months living with you, getting to know the man behind the headlines. You're not the soulless billionaire everyone thinks you are. You're someone who cares so deeply that you had to build armor around your heart just to function. Something in his expression cracked, revealing the pain he had carried for so long. I promised her I would save her, he whispered. It was the last thing I said to her before I left for college. Don't worry, Caro, I'll save you. And you're saving thousands of children in her name, Imani said gently. The center you're building will help so many families avoid what yours went through. Don't you think that would make her proud? Alexander's composure finally broke. His shoulders sagged and he closed his eyes, a single tear tracking down his cheek. Without thinking, Imani stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment he remained rigid in her embrace. Then, slowly, his arms came around her, holding her as if she were a lifeline in a storm. They stood like that for a long time, his face buried in her hair, her hands rubbing soothing circles on his back. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer somehow, as if a burden had been partially lifted. He looked at her with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. Why are you still here? He asked, his voice rough. After everything you've learned about me, my family, this arrangement, why do you stay? The question caught Imani off guard. The answer that rose to her lips surprised her with its truth. Because I care about you, she said simply. The real you, not the persona you show the world. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. Hope mingled with fear. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he raised a hand to cup her cheek. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. Imani, he whispered, her name a question and a plea. She leaned into his touch, heart racing. Yes. Instead of answering with words, Alexander lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. It was a first kiss in every sense, hesitant, exploring, full of unspoken emotion. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. I never expected this, he admitted softly. Never thought I could feel this way again. Feel what way? Imani needed to hear him say it, to know this wasn't just comfort sought in a moment of vulnerability. Alexander drew back slightly, his eyes meeting hers with newfound openness. Like I've found something worth more than all my business empires combined. Like I've found someone who sees past every wall I've built and still chooses to stay. It wasn't quite a declaration of love, but in that moment, it was enough. Imani smiled and leaned forward to kiss him again, a silent promise that she wasn't going anywhere. That night, for the first time, Alexander walked her not to her door but through it. They didn't make love, both sensing that crossing that threshold required more time, more certainty, but they lay together on her bed, talking until dawn about dreams and fears, memories and hopes. As sunlight began to filter through the curtains, Alexander traced gentle patterns on her palm. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Relationships. Opening up. I'll make mistakes. So will I, Imani replied. But maybe we can figure it out together. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his handsome face, making him look younger, unburdened. I'd like that. As Alexander drifted to sleep beside her, still fully clothed on top of the covers, Imani watched his face relax in slumber. The soulless billionaire had a soul after all, wounded, guarded, but capable of incredible depth. And somehow, impossibly, she was falling in love with it. Are you absolutely certain about this? Alexander asked for the third time as they walked through the ornate doors of Westfield Industries' annual gala. Imani squeezed his hand reassuringly. I'm certain. It's time everyone saw the real us. 3 months had passed since their first kiss and so much had changed. Alexander still worked long hours, but he made time for her, sharing meals, discussing his projects, even asking her opinion on business matters. He had surprised her by setting up a foundation in her name to provide nursing scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And though he still kept some parts of himself guarded, each day he opened up a little more. Most significantly, 2 weeks ago he had moved his things into her room, officially making it their room. Their first night together as true husband and wife had been everything Imani hadn't dared to hope for: tender, passionate, a genuine connection of bodies and hearts. Now they were attending the biggest social event of the season as a real couple, not as part of a business arrangement. The whispers had started the moment they entered arm in arm, obviously comfortable with each other, Alexander's usual stern expression softened by something that looked suspiciously like happiness. "Alexander. Imani. Wonderful to see you both," Richard Westfield boomed, approaching with his wife Vivian, whose smile froze when she saw their clasped hands. "Richard, Vivian," Alexander nodded politely. "You two seem cozy," Vivian observed, her tone suggesting she found it distasteful. "How sweet. Marriage suits us," Imani replied smoothly. "Though I understand that's rare in certain circles." Vivian's eyes narrowed at the subtle dig. It was well known that the Westfields' marriage was one of convenience, maintained for business purposes while each pursued other interests discreetly. "Indeed," she said coldly. "Though one wonders how long novelty can sustain such an unconventional match." Alexander's arm tightened around Imani's waist. "Some things improve with time, Vivian. My appreciation for my wife certainly has." The possessive note in his voice sent a pleasant shiver down Imani's spine. This public acknowledgement of their changing relationship felt significant, a declaration to the world that what had begun as a transaction had become something real. As the evening progressed, they moved through the crowd together, no longer at opposite ends of the room as they had been at their first event. Alexander kept her close, his hand rarely leaving the small of her back, his eyes frequently seeking hers across conversations. "People are staring," Imani murmured at one point. "Let them," Alexander replied, his voice low and intimate. "They're just shocked to discover I'm human after all." Those words echoed in Imani's mind hours later as they returned home, the mansion now truly feeling like home to her. They moved together through their nightly routine, Alexander loosening his tie, Imani kicking off her uncomfortable heels, both laughing about some particularly outrageous gossip they'd overheard. In their bedroom, as Imani sat at her vanity removing her earrings, Alexander came to stand behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror's reflection. "You've changed me," he said quietly, his hands resting on her shoulders. Imani turned to face him. "I don't think I changed you, Alexander. I think you were always this person. You just needed someone to see it." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. In the 3 months since their relationship had shifted, they had shared increasing intimacy but never explicit declarations. Something in his expression told her that was about to change. "When we married, I thought I was gaining a wife in name only," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Someone to complete the picture of success the world expected. What I never anticipated was finding a partner. Someone who would challenge me, support me, make me want to be better." Imani's heart raced as he continued. "I promised you honesty, so here's the truth. I'm in love with you, Imani. Completely, utterly in love with you. And while our beginning was unusual, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that what we've found is real." Tears welled in Imani's eyes. "Alexander. You don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. If you want to maintain our arrangement as it is, I understand. But I needed you to know how I feel." Imani slid from the chair to kneel before him, bringing them face to face. "Do you really think I could share your bed, your home, your life and not fall in love with you?" Hope bloomed in his eyes. "Imani?" "I love you, Alexander Stone," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "Not your money, not your name, not what you can do for my family. Just you, with all your complexities and contradictions, your strengths and your scars." The kiss that followed was different from any they had shared before, a seal on words that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. They had already been building a life together. Now they simply had a name for what burned between them. Later, as they lay entwined in sheets rumpled from lovemaking that felt both familiar and brand new, Alexander traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" Imani asked, nestling closer to his warmth. He was quiet for a moment, his fingers still tracing patterns on her skin. "I'm thinking about how close I came to missing this. If you hadn't needed help for your family, if I hadn't seen your background check, if you had said no? But I didn't, she reminded him, pressing a kiss to his chest. And here we are. Here we are, he echoed, a note of wonder in his voice. From a business arrangement to this. Do you regret how we started? She asked. Alexander considered the question seriously. I regret that our beginning caused you pain. That you felt trapped, that you had to sacrifice your freedom. His arms tightened around her. But I can't regret anything that brought you into my life. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope, he said simply. A future worth looking forward to. As Imani drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she marveled at life's unexpected turns. 8 months ago she had felt cornered, desperate, agreeing to marry a stranger to save her family. Now she was falling asleep beside a man she loved deeply, a man who loved her in return. Sometimes, it seemed, the most unpromising beginnings led to the most beautiful destinations. Are you sure about this? Imani asked, watching Alexander pace the hospital waiting room. We don't have to decide today. 6 months had passed since they had confessed their love for each other, and their relationship had only deepened with time. Alexander had gradually delegated more of his work, making space in his life for things that mattered more, mainly Imani and her family who had become regular visitors at the mansion. Imani had completed her nursing degree and was now working part-time at the Alexander Stone Pediatric Center, specializing in oncology care. They had settled into a rhythm of shared life that felt right to both of them. The only shadow had been Alexander's lingering grief over Caroline, still present, though less crushing than before. Which was what had led them to this moment in this hospital, waiting for news that could change everything. I'm sure, Alexander said, though his nervous energy belied his words. If you are. Before Imani could respond, a door opened and a social worker named Melissa entered, smiling warmly. They're ready for you now. Alexander took a deep breath, reaching for Imani's hand. Together, they followed Melissa down a corridor decorated with cheerful murals of animals and fairy tale characters, eventually stopping outside a playroom where a little girl sat alone, carefully coloring a picture. Zoe? Melissa called gently. Remember those people I told you about? They're here to meet you. The girl looked up, her dark eyes solemn in her small face. At 7 years old, Zoe Williams had already endured more than most people face in a lifetime. Orphaned when her parents died in a car accident, she had been diagnosed with leukemia shortly after entering the foster system. The Alexander Stone Foundation had funded her successful treatment, which was how she had first come to their attention. Now in remission but still without a permanent home, Zoe represented everything that mattered to both of them. A child who needed love, a second chance, a future. Hello, Alexander said, kneeling to her level. His voice, usually so confident in boardrooms and business negotiations, held a note of uncertainty. I'm Alexander. This is my wife, Imani. Zoe studied them both with the wary assessment of a child who had learned not to trust too quickly. Your hospital made me better, she said finally. Alexander's smile was gentle. I'm very glad to hear that. Are you really rich? She asked bluntly. Miss Melissa said you have a big house. We do have a big house, Imani confirmed, joining Alexander at the child's level. Too big for just the two of us, really? Is that why you want a kid? To fill up your house? The directness of the question startled a laugh from Alexander. No, Zoe. We want a child because we have love to give. A house is just a building. A family is what makes it a home. Something in his words seemed to reach the girl. She tilted her head, considering them with those serious eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. I had a family before. Then I didn't. Then I got sick. I know, Alexander said softly. My little sister got sick too when she was just a bit older than you. Did she get better? A shadow passed over Alexander's face. No. She didn't have the kind of treatment you received. Zoe nodded sagely. That's sad. Is that why you made the hospital? Because you were sad about your sister? Yes, Alexander admitted. I wanted to help other children like her. Like you. The little girl seemed to consider this information carefully. If I came to live with you, would I have to call you Dad right away? The question pierced through Alexander's composure. Imani squeezed his hand supportively as he gathered himself. You could call me Alexander until you felt comfortable with something else, he said. Or you could never call me Dad at all. That would be completely up to you. What about school? I like school. There's an excellent school near our home, Imani said. And I'm a nurse, so I understand your medical needs. We'd make sure you had the best care, the best education, the best of everything we could provide. Zoe's gaze moved between them, assessing. Then, with the simple directness of childhood, she asked the question that mattered most. Would you love me? Even though I'm not yours? Alexander's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. Zoe, if you came to live with us, you would be ours. And we would love you with our whole hearts. Something in his sincerity seemed to satisfy her. She nodded once, decisive, then held out her drawing. I made this. It's a family. Imani took the offered paper, tears welling as she saw the 3 stick figures holding hands. A tall man, a woman with curly hair, and a small girl between them. Above them, floating in the sky, was another stick figure with wings. Who's that? She asked gently, pointing to the winged figure. That's Alexander's sister, Zoe said matter-of-factly. She's watching from heaven, making sure you're a good dad. Alexander made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. In that moment, Imani knew with absolute certainty that this child belonged with them, and they with her. The adoption process would take time, of course. There would be more visits, home studies, paperwork. But as they left the hospital that day, having promised Zoe they would return soon, Imani felt a sense of rightness settle over her. She's perfect, Alexander said quietly as they got into the car. Absolutely perfect. She's been through so much, Imani replied. But she's strong. Like someone else I know. Alexander's eyes, when they met hers, were full of emotion. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For saying yes. That day in my office when I proposed our arrangement. For taking a chance on a man everyone called soulless. For seeing something in me worth loving. He took her hand, kissing her palm with reverence. For completing our family. Imani leaned across to kiss him, pouring all her love into the gesture. We've come full circle, haven't we? What began as helping my family has led to creating our own. Life has a strange way of working out, Alexander agreed. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most perfect endings. As they drove home, to the mansion that would soon echo with a child's laughter, Imani reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate agreement in a cold office to this moment of perfect joy. From strangers bound by contract to partners bound by love. From a soulless billionaire and his reluctant bride to a family on the verge of completion. Some might call it fate. Others, a lucky coincidence. But Imani preferred to think of it as a heart's bargain that had paid dividends neither of them could have imagined. 1 year to the day after their arranged marriage began, Imani stood in the garden of the stone mansion, their home, surrounded by fairy lights and flowers. The night air was warm, scented with roses and possibility. A small gathering of those closest to them had assembled for what guests believed was an anniversary celebration but was actually something far more meaningful. Nervous? Her mother asked, adjusting Imani's simple white dress. No, Imani replied honestly. Everything feels right. And it did. In the years since she had signed the contract that changed her life, so much had transformed. Her mother was in full remission, her brother thriving in college. Imani herself had found fulfillment in her nursing career, specializing in pediatric oncology at Alexander's hospital, where she made a difference daily in children's lives. But the most profound change had been in her relationship with Alexander. What had begun as a cold business arrangement had evolved into a partnership of equals, a love that deepened with each passing day. And then there was Zoe. The 7-year-old had officially become their daughter 3 months ago, after a lengthy but ultimately successful adoption process. She had brought laughter and light to every corner of the mansion, transforming it from a showcase into a true home. Her presence had healed something in Alexander that Imani hadn't even realized was still broken, the part of him that had never forgiven himself for Caroline's death. Tonight was about making official what had already become true in their hearts. They were a family, bound by love rather than legal documents. It's time, her brother Darius said, appearing at the garden entrance. Now in his 2nd year of college, he had grown into a confident young man, largely thanks to Alexander's mentorship. Everyone's ready. Imani took a deep breath and nodded. As she walked toward the flower-decked archway where Alexander and Zoe waited, she reflected on how different this felt from their first wedding. The cold, efficient ceremony with no guests, no celebration, no love. Alexander's face as she approached told her everything she needed to know. Gone was the mask of indifference, the calculating gaze. In its place was naked adoration, wonder, and a vulnerability he showed only to her and Zoe. You look beautiful, Imani, Zoe Stage whispered as she reached them, the little girl resplendent in her flower girl dress, her health fully restored, her eyes bright with happiness. Thank you, sweetheart, Imani replied, squeezing her daughter's hand before turning to Alexander. The private ceremony that followed wasn't legally necessary, they were already married on paper. But this renewal of vows, spoken from hearts that had learned to love each other, meant more than any legal document ever could. 1 year ago, Alexander began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, I asked you to enter a business arrangement with me. I offered financial security in exchange for your presence in my life. It was the worst deal I ever made. A ripple of surprise went through the small gathering, but Imani smiled, understanding where he was going. It was the worst deal, he continued, because I vastly undervalued what I was receiving. I thought I was getting a wife in name only. Instead, I got a partner who challenges me to be better. A woman whose strength and compassion humble me daily. A mother for our daughter. A love I never thought possible for someone like me. Tears welled in Imani's eyes as he took her hands in his. So today I'm offering a new deal, Alexander said, his voice dropping to an intimate tone meant primarily for her. No contracts, no conditions. Just my heart, my life, my future, freely given for as long as you'll have me. When it was Imani's turn to speak, she had to take a moment to compose herself. When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was sacrificing my freedom for my family's security. I was prepared to endure whatever that meant, to live a life adjacent to yours but never truly part of it. Alexander's grip on her hands tightened slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. What I didn't expect, she continued, was that in giving up what I thought was my freedom, I would find something far more valuable. I found a man whose public persona hid a heart of extraordinary depth. I found purpose in our shared mission to help others. I found a father for our daughter who loves her with the same devotion he once showed his sister. She took a breath, aware of Zoe beaming up at them, of her mother wiping away tears, of the small circle of people who knew the true story of their beginning. Most of all, I found that sometimes the most unpromising soil can nurture the most beautiful growth. Our beginning wasn't conventional or romantic. But Alexander, the love that grew from it is the most real thing I've ever known. Today I'm not renewing a contract. I'm celebrating the miracle that brought you into my life, and promising to love you for all the days to come. As they exchanged rings, not the ostentatious diamond he had given her at their first wedding, but simple bands inscribed with, "From business to belonging," Imani felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with material wealth and everything to do with the richness of their shared life. The celebration that followed was intimate and joyful. Zoe danced with both her parents, her laughter healing a wound in Alexander that had festered for 15 years. Imani's mother embraced Alexander with genuine affection, whispering something that made him smile. Even Mrs. Reynolds unbent enough to raise a glass in their honor, her usual formality softened by genuine happiness for the couple who had transformed both the mansion and its owner. Later, after Zoe had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, after guests had departed with warm wishes, Imani and Alexander stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens where they had renewed their vows. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Stone," Alexander murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Imani leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Stone. Any regrets?" he asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. She turned in his arms to face him, studying the face that had become as familiar and necessary to her as her own heartbeat. "Not one," she said truthfully. "Everything that happened brought us here to this moment. How could I regret that?" Alexander's smile, once so rare, now a regular feature of their daily life, lit his eyes. "Do you remember what you asked me on our wedding night? The first one. I asked why you chose me," Imani recalled. "You said you wanted someone genuine. I told you only part of the truth," he admitted. "The full truth is that when I saw your file, saw your dedication to your family despite impossible odds, something in you called to me. Not just because you reminded me of myself or because of Caroline, but because even in those dry facts and figures, your spirit shone through." His hand cupped her cheek tenderly. "I think, on some level, a part of me recognized its match in you." "Soul calling to soul?" Imani suggested, her tone gently teasing. "Precisely that," he replied without a hint of irony. The soulless billionaire, finding the other half of his soul in the most unexpected place. As they kissed under the same moon that had witnessed their strange beginning a year earlier, Imani reflected on the journey they had traveled. From a desperate bargain to a love story worthy of fairy tales. From two wounded people seeking safety to a family built on trust and tenderness. In the end, it hadn't been about the money at all. It had been about two souls finding each other against impossible odds, healing each other's wounds, and building a future neither could have imagined alone. The virgin bride and the supposedly soulless billionaire had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not just passion or security but understanding, acceptance, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. As Alexander led her upstairs to their bedroom, now truly theirs in every sense, Imani knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as her greatest sacrifice had become her greatest blessing. And as his lips found hers in the darkness, tender and passionate at once, she sent a silent thank you to whatever twist of fate had brought them together. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unlikely ways.